You understand that if you accept this bond, you could die. The alien woman's voice carried calmly through the vast chamber, but every being present felt the weight behind the words. Across the circular hall of the imperial court, hundreds of alien eyes turned toward the tall male standing before her. He hesitated, only for a moment. Then he slowly lowered his head. I cannot accept the risk. A quiet ripple of whispers moved through the chamber. The alien woman did not react outwardly. Her posture remained elegant and perfectly composed, long silver hair cascading over her shoulders like liquid light. The faint glow beneath her pale skin pulsed softly along delicate lines near her temples, but her luminous sapphire eyes dimmed slightly. Another rejection. The male who had refused her stepped backward quickly, almost with relief, retreating into the ranks of watching nobles. Across the hall, someone murmured, "Another one." Someone else whispered, "Of course." A third voice spoke softly, "No one is foolish enough." High above them, the immense glass dome of the orbital capital revealed a breathtaking view of the stars. Warships from dozens of alien systems floated silently in formation outside the station like silent guardians of the Empire. But inside the court, the atmosphere had become heavy. Lady Violia stood alone at the center of the chamber. One by one, every male of her own species had refused her, and everyone knew why. Because Lady Violia was dangerous, not physically, not politically, but mentally. The gift she carried within her mind allowed her to do something no other member of her species could accomplish. She could connect directly with the neural architecture of their most advanced warships. Entire fleets, defense networks, battle systems with a single thought. The Empire had celebrated her ability for years, until they realized the consequences. Any life bond with her, any permanent partnership recognized by their culture, would create a shared mental bridge. A link, and that meant whoever bonded with her would feel a portion of that overwhelming power inside their own mind. Most believed the strain would break them, or worse. And so the most powerful woman in the Empire stood alone, rejected, feared. Avoided, the court waited awkwardly for her response, but Violia simply inclined her head politely toward the male who had stepped away. Your caution is understandable. Her voice remained calm, graceful, unshaken. But the silence afterward stretched long enough that even the distant diplomats along the walls began shifting uncomfortably. At the far edge of the chamber, a human man leaned casually against a tall observation column. He had been watching the entire exchange. His name was Ethan Carter. Officially, he was a diplomatic logistics officer representing Earth's small but growing interstellar alliance. Unofficially, he was the only human in the room. That fact had not gone unnoticed. A pair of tall alien nobles nearby occasionally glanced at him with subtle curiosity. Their elongated ears twitched slightly each time the whispers grew louder in the chamber. One of them leaned toward the other. That is the human representative. Yes, they allow him to attend court proceedings. He handles trade logistics. The first noble studied Ethan again. He looks relaxed. The second noble tilted his head slightly. Humans often appear relaxed when they do not understand the danger of a situation. Ethan glanced over at them. They both looked away immediately. He smiled slightly. Across the chamber, the ceremony was ending. Another failed attempt. Another formal rejection. The imperial moderator stepped forward, tall and slender, with soft violet skin and eyes that shimmered like polished glass. The court acknowledges the conclusion of the proposal session. A few nobles quietly sighed in relief. Everyone knew what this ceremony had become over the past year. A parade of refusals, each one more awkward than the last. Violia stood perfectly still as the hall slowly resumed its low, murmuring conversations. Some nobles avoided looking at her entirely. Others watched her with subtle sympathy. And a few looked almost relieved that it was not them standing in her place. Ethan folded his arms. Well, he muttered quietly to himself, that was uncomfortable. Someone beside him answered, yes, it usually is. Ethan turned his head. Standing next to him was a tall alien with dark bronze skin and eyes that glowed faint green. Thin metallic patterns traced along his collarbones, marking his rank within the Empire's diplomatic corps. Ambassador Kareth. Ethan nodded politely. Good evening. Kareth studied him for a moment. You watched the entire proceeding very closely. Ethan shrugged. I've been here long enough to know when something interesting is happening. Kareth glanced toward the center of the chamber where Violia still stood. You find humiliation interesting. Ethan winced slightly. Okay, maybe not that part. The ambassador folded his long fingers behind his back. Lady Violea's situation is unfortunate. Ethan watched her from across the room. Why does everyone act like she's radioactive? Kareth gave him a long look. You truly do not understand. Ethan gestured lightly toward the chamber. Educate me. The ambassador sighed softly. Her ability allows her to interface with Imperial Fleet command systems. I heard that part. But the neural load required to process that level of data would overwhelm most minds. Even brief exposure can cause cognitive collapse. Ethan raised an eyebrow. So bonding with her means sharing that load. Yes. And nobody wants that. Correct. Ethan considered that. Across the hall, Violea finally began walking slowly toward the exit corridor. Several nobles stepped out of her path, not rudely, but noticeably. Like people instinctively giving distance to something powerful, Ethan watched them move aside. Then he said something that made Ambassador Kareth blink. That seems unfair. Kareth looked at him. Unfair. She didn't choose her ability. That is not the issue. Then what is? The ambassador hesitated, then he answered quietly, fear. Ethan looked back toward the departing alien woman. The glowing patterns beneath her skin flickered faintly as she walked beneath the golden lights of the court. Alone, he scratched the back of his neck. You know, Ethan said thoughtfully, humans have a saying about situations like this. Kareth tilted his head. Oh. Ethan nodded toward the far end of the hall. Sometimes the problem isn't that something is dangerous. The ambassador waited. Ethan shrugged casually. Sometimes the problem is that nobody is brave enough to try. Kareth stared at him for several seconds, then slowly turned his gaze toward Violea again. Around them, the whispers of the court continued. But now, a few of the nearby nobles were no longer watching the rejected alien woman. They were watching the human. The whispers began long before Ethan realized he had become the reason for them. At first, it was only a few glances. A pair of alien nobles paused mid-conversation as he crossed the marble floor of the imperial corridor. One of them leaned closer to the other. That is the human, the one who spoke during the ceremony. Yes, their luminous eyes followed him as he walked past. Ethan pretended not to notice, which was not particularly difficult, because humans had developed a useful survival skill over centuries of awkward diplomatic situations. Ignoring strange looks. The corridor itself stretched for nearly a kilometer beneath a transparent ceiling where distant stars glimmered like scattered diamonds. Small shuttlecraft drifted between docking towers outside, their engines glowing softly in the darkness of space. Helios Prime, the imperial capital, was designed to impress. And it did. Every hallway seemed too large, every door too tall, every sculpture crafted from materials that likely cost more than Earth's entire diplomatic budget. Ethan walked past a statue of an ancient alien emperor carved from translucent crystal. The statue's eyes appeared to follow him. He stopped. Okay, that's unsettling. Those are surveillance sensors. Ethan turned his head. Ambassador Kareth was standing behind him again. The tall alien folded his long arms calmly. They monitor diplomatic activity. Ethan nodded slowly. Of course they do. He glanced back at the statue. So somewhere, someone is currently watching me talk to a rock. Kareth's expression remained neutral. Yes. Ethan sighed. Fantastic. They continued walking. Several alien officials moved aside politely as they passed, but Ethan noticed something unusual. They weren't stepping aside for Kareth. They were stepping aside for him, which made absolutely no sense. He leaned slightly toward the ambassador. Why are people staring at me? Kareth did not answer immediately. That alone made Ethan uneasy. Finally, the ambassador spoke. You are being discussed. Because I made one comment. You questioned a cultural tradition that has existed for centuries. Ethan raised a finger. In my defense, that tradition looked very stupid. Kareth stopped walking, slowly, very slowly. He turned his head toward Ethan. You said that out loud. Ethan blinked. Did I? Several nearby diplomats suddenly became very interested in a decorative wall panel. Kareth exhaled quietly. Humans truly do have remarkable courage. Ethan smiled, or poor impulse control. They resumed walking. After a moment, Ethan spoke again. So what happens now? Now, with Lady Violea. Kareth glanced toward the distant corridor where the nobles had dispersed earlier. She will continue to be avoided. That seems like a terrible long-term strategy. It is the current strategy. Ethan rubbed his chin thoughtfully. You know, if humans handled problems that way, we'd never get anything done. Kareth looked mildly curious. How do humans handle dangerous situations? Ethan shrugged. We usually poke them with a stick until something happens. The ambassador stared at him. That explains a great deal about your species. They reached a large observation balcony overlooking the inner docking ring of the capital station. Below them, enormous cargo vessels floated slowly into position, while swarms of maintenance drones moved like tiny mechanical insects along their hulls. Ethan leaned on the railing. I still don't understand something. Kareth waited. If her ability is that powerful, wouldn't the Empire want someone bonded to her? Yes, then why is everyone terrified? Kareth hesitated, then answered quietly, because power is rarely the true reason people are afraid. Ethan looked at him, then what is? Control. Before Ethan could respond, footsteps approached behind them, not the quiet, careful steps of diplomats. These steps were confident, precise, and the moment they echoed across the metal floor, the surrounding aliens reacted instantly. Several stepped aside, others lowered their heads slightly. Ethan turned. Lady Violia stood at the entrance of the balcony. Up close, her presence was even more striking than before. The faint, luminous patterns beneath her pale skin shifted like slow lightning beneath glass, and her sapphire eyes reflected the distant stars behind Ethan. But what caught Ethan's attention wasn't her appearance. It was her expression, curious, studying, and directed entirely at him. Ambassador Kareth bowed slightly. Lady Violia. She acknowledged the greeting with a small nod. But her gaze never left Ethan. The silence stretched long enough that Ethan eventually pointed at himself. Hi. Kareth closed his eyes briefly. Violia's lips curved almost imperceptibly. You are the human. That narrows it down considerably. You spoke in the court. Technically, I made one comment. It has been discussed extensively. Ethan scratched his neck. Yeah, I'm getting that impression. She stepped closer, not threateningly, but with deliberate interest. You suggested that fear was the reason others refused to bond with me. Ethan shrugged slightly. It seemed obvious. Around them, several nearby aliens had stopped pretending not to listen. Violia tilted her head. You say that without understanding the consequences. That's fair. You do not know what my power does to a mind. Also fair. You do not know the political forces involved. Definitely fair. Her glowing eyes narrowed slightly, and yet you spoke. Ethan nodded, yes. Why? The question hung in the air. For a moment, Ethan simply looked at her, really looked. At the faint exhaustion hidden behind her composure. At the way people in the corridor instinctively kept their distance. At the quiet isolation surrounding someone who clearly carried enormous responsibility. Then he answered honestly. Because it looked like everyone in that room was more afraid of embarrassment than they were interested in helping you. The silence that followed was profound. Several aliens along the balcony shifted uncomfortably. Ambassador Kareth slowly opened one eye. Violia studied Ethan's face, carefully. Then she said something that made the watching nobles freeze. Are humans always this direct? Ethan smiled slightly. Only when something annoys us. A faint glow pulsed beneath her skin again. Not anger, something closer to amusement. You speak as if you are not afraid. Ethan leaned casually against the railing. Oh, I'm definitely afraid. That surprised her. Of me. No. Of what then? Ethan gestured vaguely toward the enormous capital station surrounding them. Messing up the paperwork after this conversation. Several nearby diplomats choked on their drinks. Violia stared at him. Then unexpectedly she laughed. The sound was soft but genuine, and it echoed across the balcony like something rare. The surrounding aliens looked stunned. Ambassador Kareth blinked twice. Remarkable, he muttered quietly. Violia stepped closer to Ethan now, close enough that he could see the faint electric shimmer dancing within her glowing eyes. You are unusual, human. I get that a lot. You are also reckless. Also true. Her gaze sharpened slightly, and yet, she paused. You are the first person today who has not looked at me like I might destroy them. Ethan shrugged again. Well, he glanced at the distant warships floating outside the station. If you were going to destroy something, you probably would have done it already. The nobles listening nearby exchanged uneasy looks. Violia studied him for several long seconds. Then she asked quietly, Tell me, Ethan Carter. He straightened slightly. How much do you know about the neural strain caused by bonding with me? Almost nothing, and yet you question the decision of those who refused. Yep, she stepped even closer now, close enough that several diplomats began whispering nervously, her voice lowered slightly. If you understood the risk, you might not be so confident. Ethan met her glowing gaze without flinching. Maybe. Another pause. Then he said something that caused the entire balcony to go silent. But I think someone should at least consider it. Ambassador Kareth froze. Several nearby aliens gasped softly. Vyrlia's luminous eyes widened just slightly. You would consider it? Ethan immediately raised both hands. Whoa, hold on. A few nervous diplomats exhaled in relief. Ethan smiled. I didn't say I was volunteering. The relief vanished. Then he added casually, I'm just saying I wouldn't run away. And suddenly, the whispers around the balcony returned. But now they sounded very different, because for the first time since her situation had become known, an alien noblewoman feared by her entire civilization was standing face to face with someone who wasn't afraid of her at all. And every alien watching could feel it. Something important had just begun. The alarm began as a low vibration beneath their feet. At first it was so subtle that only the station's maintenance drones seemed to notice, their lights flickering as they paused mid-flight along the docking ring outside the observation balcony. Then the sound grew louder. A deep mechanical pulse rolled through the massive structure of the orbital capital. Every alien on the balcony froze. Ambassador Kareth turned toward the ceiling. That is not a ceremonial alert. Ethan leaned slightly over the railing, looking toward the distant fleets hovering beyond the station. What kind of alert is it? Kareth's glowing eyes narrowed. The dangerous kind. Across the station, the calm diplomatic lighting shifted abruptly to a muted amber. A calm but firm voice echoed through the immense corridors. Imperial Defense Network activated. Unidentified fleet entering restricted space. The whispers began immediately. Fleet. From where? That vector is outside Imperial territory. Vyrlia's luminous eyes lifted toward the stars visible through the transparent dome. And for the first time since Ethan had met her, concern appeared on her face. Ambassador Kareth's voice dropped. House Valtharis. Several nearby nobles inhaled sharply. Ethan looked between them. That sounds like a problem. Kareth nodded slowly. One of the Empire's rival houses. And they brought a fleet to a diplomatic capital. Yes, Ethan crossed his arms. That seems extremely rude. Outside the station, distant shapes began appearing from the darkness. Warships, dozens of them. Long, sleek vessels with crimson engine trails cutting across the void like streaks of fire. The surrounding Imperial fleet moved immediately, defensive formations shifting as shields began glowing faintly across their hulls. Ethan watched silently for a moment. Then he asked quietly, They're not here for trade negotiations, are they? No, Kareth said. They are here for her. All eyes slowly turned toward Vyrlia. The luminous patterns beneath her skin flickered faintly. Valtharis believes my existence destabilizes their strategic advantage, she said calmly. Ethan blinked. So their solution is war. Yes, that seems like an overreaction. The station trembled again as distant energy pulses flashed between ships in orbit. A voice from the defense network echoed through the dome. Imperial fleet requesting neural command interface authorization. Several nobles immediately looked at Vyrlia, but none of them spoke. None of them moved. Ethan noticed. He tilted his head slightly. They need you. Kareth answered quietly, Yes. Then why is no one saying anything? The ambassador's voice carried a heavy truth. Because commanding the entire defense grid alone could overwhelm even her mind. Ethan slowly turned toward Vyrlia. The glow beneath her skin pulsed brighter now, reacting instinctively to the activation signals reaching for her neural interface. Thousands of ships, millions of combat systems, all waiting, but she remained still, because she knew what the others knew, without a bonded partner to stabilize the neural feedback. The strain could destroy her. Ethan rubbed the back of his neck. Well, he muttered, that's inconvenient timing. Vyrlia finally spoke. Evacuate the diplomatic levels, she said calmly to Kareth. The defense network will slow them long enough. Kareth's eyes widened slightly. You intend to command the fleet alone. It is the only option. The surrounding nobles began murmuring urgently. You cannot. The neural load. You will collapse before the battle ends. Violia did not argue. She simply turned toward the central command corridor, ready to face the burden alone. Ethan watched her take 3 steps, then he sighed. Okay. She stopped, slowly turning back toward him. Ethan scratched his chin thoughtfully. You know, he said, this might be a very bad idea. Kareth blinked. Human, this is not the time. Ethan raised a finger. Let me finish. The ambassador fell silent. Ethan looked directly at Violia. You said earlier that bonding with you shares the neural load. Yes, and humans have unusually adaptable neural patterns. Yes, and no one here is brave enough to try. The nobles around them suddenly grew very quiet. Ethan shrugged. Well, he stepped forward. Let's test that theory. The entire balcony froze. Ambassador Kareth stared at him. You cannot possibly be serious. Ethan glanced at him. Oh, I'm very serious. Then he looked back at Violia. Her glowing eyes had widened. You do not understand the risk, she said quietly. I understand enough. You could lose your mind. Wouldn't be the first time someone accused me of that. Several nobles gasped softly. Kareth whispered, human. But Ethan had already stepped closer, standing directly in front of her now. For what it's worth, he said lightly, this might ruin my career. Violia's voice softened. Ethan, for the first time uncertainty appeared in her expression. Not fear for herself, fear for him. You owe me nothing. Ethan smiled. I know. Another tremor shook the station, as the first distant explosions echoed across the orbital battlefield. He gestured toward the stars. But someone needs to stand with you. Silence spread across the balcony. Hundreds of watching aliens held their breath, because no one in the history of the Empire had ever seen someone do what the human was doing now. Violia looked into his eyes for a long moment, searching, measuring. Then she asked the final question. You truly are not afraid of me? Ethan shrugged. I'm more afraid of paperwork. For a second, the faintest smile touched her lips. Then she reached out. Her glowing hand met his. The moment their palms touched, light surged between them like a pulse of living energy. Several nobles cried out. The neural link activated instantly. Across the entire orbital defense grid, command systems ignited. Inside Ethan's mind, stars exploded into existence. Thousands of ships, millions of signals, weapon trajectories, shield matrices. Tactical overlays unfolding faster than thought. The data storm hit him like a tidal wave. Ethan staggered. Kareth shouted, he will collapse. But Ethan gritted his teeth. Wow, he gasped. That's a lot of tabs open. Violia's eyes widened, because he was still standing. The neural storm that should have shattered a mind was stabilizing, balancing, their thoughts synchronized, her immense processing power guiding the battlefield. His adaptable human mind absorbing the overflow. Outside the station, the Imperial fleet suddenly moved with terrifying precision. Dozens of warships pivoted in perfect formation. Defense grids ignited. Energy beams cut across space with surgical accuracy. The attacking fleet faltered. Command systems overwhelmed by the sudden strategic brilliance of the defense. Within minutes, the crimson ships of House Valtharis began retreating into the darkness. The battle ended almost as quickly as it began. Inside the balcony chamber, Ethan blinked, then exhaled slowly. Okay, he said, that was intense. The neural glow faded. Their hands slowly separated. Violia stared at him in stunned silence. Around them, the watching nobles looked equally shocked. Because the impossible had just happened. The human was still standing. Ethan stretched his neck. You know, he said casually, I think I see why everyone was nervous. Ambassador Kareth stepped forward slowly. His voice carried disbelief. You survived the neural bond. Ethan shrugged. Humans are good at multitasking. The nobles began whispering again. But now the whispers carried awe, respect, something deeper. Violia looked at him, not with curiosity now, but with something warm, something powerful. You did not run, she said softly. Ethan smiled. Told you I wouldn't. Far beyond the station, the defeated fleet vanished into hyperspace. Peace returned to the stars, and for the first time in years, Lady Violia was no longer standing alone, because beside her stood the one being in the galaxy who had not feared her power. A human who had simply decided that someone brave enough to carry the weight of a fleet deserved someone brave enough to stand beside her.